God doesn't intervene to stop suffering, and I'm trying to find this stuff in St. Augustine. I haven't found it yet. But people have thought about this for thousands of years. I'm talking to people in the clergy to try to figure this out. What do different faiths say? I don't think that's good enough, even for people of faith. Atheists, of course, could hope that aliens would show up and save us. I'm left really with only one thing, which is relinquishment, which is don't develop the things that are just too dangerous. Some of this knowledge and technology is just too much for people at our level, for a species at our level of sophistication. We did renounce the development of biological weapons. The U.S. did that unilaterally. I see Stuart Brandis here. I copied a quote out of a Wired forum that he said, a potential extinction event is the right language to use. Everyone agrees there's an iceberg. The question is, will it hit the ship, miss the ship, or replace the ship? Or maybe, unthinkable, the ship will slow down and study the iceberg for a while. And I think that's my suggestion. Now, a good question is how much danger is there? John Leslie says probably a 30% danger, but if I send him the article, he might unfortunately raise it. And that's assuming also you don't accept what's called the doomsday argument, which is roughly that, quote, we ought to have some reluctance to believe that are very exceptionally early, for instance, in the earliest 0.001% among all humans who will ever have lived. Namely, if humans are going to live for a long time, then you're much more likely to have born after the galaxy was colonized. And so the fact that it hasn't gives us some concern. Ray Kurzweil says that we have a better than even chance of making it through, with the caveat that he has, quote, always been accused of being an optimist. So I think either of these estimates are far beyond completely unacceptable. And the scary thing about them is they're really only talking about the probability of extinction. There are a lot of other horrid outcomes short of extinction which these technologies will enable. So we really need to talk about ethics. Clearly, the unchecked use of these technologies can cause genocide or extinction. As scientists, I don't think we should be complicit in genocide. We have to put in some proper safeguards to limit development. And this must account for the reality of extremists. I think we have to get beyond what I would call scientific fatalism. Just whatever happens, happens, and take some responsibility. For example, I don't think we should risk our future on whatever certain physical constants happen to turn out to be. It was quite responsible before they blew out the A-bomb to try to figure out whether it was going to light the atmosphere on fire and burn down the planet. Teller did the calculation, and they finally agreed it probably wouldn't destroy the planet. I think there was a 3 in a million chance. Now, of course, experiment like this is going to be run here in, a few weeks with the quark-gluon plasma strangelet to see if that destroys the Earth, using the relativistic heavy ion collider. There was an environmental impact suit filed to try to stop this test because people couldn't figure out what was going to happen. But my understanding is a federal judge apparently decided that the test could go ahead. I hope he took a physics class. So at least that's better than having a crazy person decide the future, say, of your race or your family or something. So the situation we're in seems to come from the fact that scientific attitude reveres knowledge above all. Robert Oppenheimer said, and just after the exploding of the bomb, it's not possible to be a scientist unless you believe that the knowledge of the world and the power which this gives is a thing which has intrinsic value to humanity, and that you're using it to help in the spread of knowledge and are willing to take the consequences. In other words, disclaiming responsibility, which I find appalling, and I read everything I could find that he ever wrote, and he never retracted it. I think KMDs and the bug, I would say, with them forces us to re-examine this attitude. In the article I said, yes, I know knowledge is good, as is a search for new truths. We've, as a bedrock value in our society, long agreed on the value of open access to information and recognized the problems that arise with attempts to restrict access to and development of knowledge. In recent times, we've come to revere scientific knowledge. But despite the strong historical precedents, if open access to an unlimited development of knowledge henceforth puts us all in clear danger of extinction, then common sense demands that we re-examine even these basic long-held truths. Truth cannot be the highest goal. It was Nietzsche who warned us at the end of the 19th century not only that God is dead, but that, quote, faith in science, which after all exists undeniably, cannot owe its origin to a calculus of utility. It must have originated in spite of the fact that the disutility and dangerousness of the will to truth, of truth at any price, is proved to it constantly. It's this further danger that we now fully face, the consequences of our truth-seeking. The truth that science seeks can certainly be considered a dangerous substitute for God if it's likely to lead to our extinction. The Romans recognized that the enforcement of an absolutely just law without any exceptions, irrespective of particular differences, would work absolute injustice. And so while the search for truth is always a good thing, there is always the exception. Aristotle, who founded modern science, in his Nicomachean Ethics said, "The final end is not truth, it's happiness. We call final without qualification that which is always desirable in itself and never for the sake of something else. Now such a thing, happiness, above all else is held to be. For this we choose always for itself and never for the sake of something else." This is the exact same point that the Dalai Lama makes in his book, Ethics for the New Millennium, and argues very strongly that we should try to understand what makes people happy, and there's strong evidence that material progress and the pursuit of knowledge are not what makes people happy. Both East and West, at least the West, in the historic times, recognized the limits of science. So what do we do now? We have to get more discussion going. I think we have to study the technical and the ethical issues. We have to take lessons from what we learned about nuclear weapons and the weapons of mass destruction. Hans Bethe has called for people to cease and desist in developing weapons of mass destruction. We've had an idea of a Hippocratic Oath for scientists, technologists, managers. We have the Acheson-Lilienthal report and the Baruch Plan, which attempted to internationalize atomic energy to keep it out of the hands of terrorists and promoting multipolar. We have the relinquishment experience from biological weapons. We have the verification experience from the biological and chemical weapons treaties. And we're also going to have to take any efforts like this into cyberspace and deal with commercial use. So we're going to have to think about how this would affect intellectual property, how we have to change liability law, and how we would verify in cyberspace. So lastly, what I'd like to tell you is what's happened to me in the 2 weeks roughly since the article appeared. I've gotten an enormous number of hopeful electronic mails to my email address, which is not all that public, including a number of scientists and several Nobel Prize winners who have been very supportive. I have organizational interest. In the next 6 weeks, I'm speaking at a meeting of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, American Association for the Advancement of Science, the National Research Council for Science in Canada, the Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility, and the Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard, which has been working on these issues for 25 years. There's international media interest in this story, and I have to tell you that the length of the media opportunities is increasing. The first week, most of them were 5 minutes. It's up to 20 to 30-minute pieces, so people are taking it and being willing to do it at a serious length. The fears, most of the email I get of people who don't like it say relinquishment is impossible and will make it worse, and collective controls are bad in principle because of government. So I'd say there's a substantial bias to sober hope over fear, and that gives me hope. The 20th century was clearly a century of war. It was a very bloody century. We fortunately avoided the nuclear disaster. We created the ability for nation-states to destroy civilization. The 21st century, if we're not careful, will be a century of pestilences, in my opinion, much more like the 14th or 16th. I think we have to change our ways, as Einstein suggested, to avoid such disasters and avoid democratizing extreme evil. Thank you.